Rosedale, West Virginia, summer 1982. They weren't looking for trouble, just a quiet day hike through Hollow Grove, a remote stretch of forest whispered about in town, but rarely visited. The map they followed was old, the trail almost forgotten, and by the time the sun dipped low behind the moss-covered trees, the four friends had already strayed far from anything familiar. They thought they found the perfect spot to set up camp, a clearing by a still black lake that hadn't seen a soul in decades. But as night swallowed the forest and the fire cracked in uneasy silence, something else began to wake beneath the earth. Faint footsteps circled the tents, even though no one was there. Whispers slipped between the trees, calling each of them by name. And then the ground began to breathe. The sun had barely risen when Eli's beat-up station wagon pulled off the gravel road and into the overgrown path that led to Hollow Grove. The air was thick with the scent of pine and old rain. With backpacks slung over their shoulders and canteens clipped to their belts, the four friends, Eli, Tommy, Rachel, and June, set off into the forest with light hearts and the thrill of the unknown pulsing in their veins. The trail was narrow and forgotten, swallowed by roots and time. They pushed through thick brush, past rusting fence posts, and ignored the occasional private property sign half buried in the moss. According to an old hiking book Eli found in his grandfather's attic, there used to be a farmhouse deep in the woods, long gone now, but the trail was rumored to lead to a beautiful, hidden lake. They laughed, joked, and took Polaroids as they walked. Birds chirped high in the trees, and the sunlight poured through the canopy in golden shafts. It was perfect. But around midday, things began to shift. The air grew still, too still. The cheerful forest sounds dulled, as if something had sucked the life out of them. The trees seemed closer together, their twisted trunks leaning in as though listening. June stopped first. "Do you guys feel that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Feel what?" Tommy grinned nervously. "Your fear of bugs?" "No," she said slowly. "It's heavy, the air, like we're being watched." Rachel scanned the woods. "We've been hiking for hours. It's just the forest playing tricks on you." But they all felt it then, that creeping sense of being observed. Not by animals, not by people, by something older. They pressed on. The trail narrowed, winding through tangled thickets and past strange stone piles stacked like forgotten markers. Finally, just as the sun began to slide lower in the sky, they broke through the trees and found it. A wide, glassy lake, black as ink and perfectly still. The clearing around it was eerily quiet. No birds, no frogs, just wind rippling through the tall grass. "This is it," Eli said. "Perfect spot to set up camp." But as they unpacked their gear, Rachel paused. Near the edge of the clearing stood a crooked tree. At its base, just barely visible in the fading light, were rusted iron chains tangled in the roots. As if something once tried to be held down there. She didn't say anything. Not yet. Because the night hadn't even started. As night fell over Hollow Grove, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The four friends sat around a small campfire, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the trees. The lake, still and dark, looked like an open eye, watching them. Even the crackle of the firewood sounded too loud in the suffocating silence. Tommy tried to lighten the mood. "So, ghost stories, anyone?" Rachel forced a laugh. "I think we're already living one." Just then, the temperature dropped. Eli zipped up his jacket. "Anyone else freezing?" It wasn't just cold, it was unnatural, a creeping chill that seemed to crawl under their skin, as if the warmth was being pulled from inside their bones. The fire flickered violently, as if a sudden gust had swept through. But the trees didn't move. The air was dead still. Then they heard it. A whisper. It came from behind them, from the edge of the trees. At first, they thought it was the wind, but there was no wind. and the voice was too clear, too intentional, a long, slow whisper that dragged across the clearing like a knife over stone. "Eli." He stood up, heart pounding. "Did you hear that?" Pounding. Everyone froze. "Rachel." Rachel's breath caught in her throat. The voice was close, right behind her. She spun around, flashlight trembling in her hand, but saw nothing. Then June screamed. A figure, a dark silhouette, stood across the lake, still as stone, its reflection rippling in the black water even though the figure didn't move. It was featureless, tall, and impossibly thin. The moment their flashlights hit it, it vanished. They all backed toward the tent, clutching each other, but the voices didn't stop. Tommy. Now the whispers were coming from under their feet. The ground seemed to groan. Something shifted beneath the soil. Not an animal, something larger, older, hungry. Rachel dropped to her knees and brushed away a patch of grass, revealing a slab of crumbling stone hidden in the dirt. Faded, worn letters were barely visible, etched with names. And then she saw it. Her own name, a perfect match. Not carved recently, but old, weathered, like it had been there for decades. She stumbled back, shaking her head. No, this can't be here. But it was. They were standing on graves. Not just a few, dozens, all arranged in rows beneath the clearing, all covered in moss and dirt and forgotten time. And the whispers grew louder. From the woods, from the ground, from inside the tent. The campsite, once peaceful, now felt like a trap. Something wanted them there. Something remembered their names. The fire had long died out, but none of them dared to relight it. They stood close together, flashlights trembling in their hands, staring at the overgrown gravestones littered across the clearing. Each stone bore a different name, yet somehow every name felt familiar. It was as if the forest had been whispering them into their dreams long before they arrived. June pointed to a crooked wooden post leaning near the lake, half swallowed by vines. A rusted plaque hung from it by a single nail. Tommy brushed away the leaves. The words were almost illegible, but enough remained. Willowvale Farm, Est, 1864. Family Cemetery. Do not disturb. Rachel gasped. This place used to be a farm. Yeah, Eli murmured. A farm built on the backs of the dead. Suddenly, the trees groaned, all of them, together. It sounded like moaning wood, but also like voices, layered and writhing, rising from the earth. Then, through the mist came the sound of footsteps, heavy, wet, slow, coming toward them. From every direction. "Into the tent!" Tommy yelled. They bolted inside and zipped it shut, but it didn't help. The tent felt thinner than paper, useless against whatever was out there. The whispers began again, louder now, urgent, furious. "Get out! You see us now. You woke us." Rachel, trembling, reached into her backpack for her journal, flipping to a page she'd scribbled in earlier. Notes from a book on folklore she read for a college class. There it was. Some believed land soaked in grief could remember the living, especially when families died violently or never left. She looked at the others. This wasn't just a farm. Something horrible happened here. Maybe the family didn't just die. Maybe they were buried alive or cursed, or... The zipper of the tent unzipped on its own. The flap opened. Nothing. Empty air. But then, muddy footprints appeared on the tarp floor, one by one, approaching them. June screamed. Eli dropped his flashlight. Rachel clutched Tommy's hand. Suddenly, the air shifted again. A rush of wind blew through the tent, flipping their things, scattering dirt and ashes, and the voice returned, louder than ever. Find the cellar. Then silence. Total crushing silence. The air was still, and outside, the mist was gone. It was as if the forest had reset itself. The gravestones, however, remained, undeniable proof that what they saw was real. Tommy was the first to speak. "If we want to get out of here, I think we have to find that cellar." Morning never came, at least not the kind they expected. Though their watchers swore it was nearly 8 a.m., the forest still hung in a hazy twilight gloom. The sky was colorless, the sun hidden, and the air felt wrong, heavy and damp, like they were standing at the bottom of a deep well. "We have to find the cellar," Rachel said again, gripping her journal tightly. Following the lake's edge, they noticed that the trees grew sparse in one particular spot. The grass there had browned and withered, forming a rough path that led toward a series of crumbling stone steps half buried under moss and branches. The old foundation of the farmhouse. Eli knelt and brushed off the dirt from a crooked wooden trapdoor hidden beneath a collapsed shed. "There," he whispered. "This has to be it." June hesitated. Why would they bury the entrance? "To keep something in," Tommy muttered. The rusty hinges screamed as they pulled the door open. Cold air gushed out, not just cold, freezing, like the breath of a tomb. And rising with it was that same whispering sound. Only now, it wasn't angry. It sounded desperate, pleading. With shaking hands, they descended the stone steps. The cellar was wide, low-ceilinged, and smelled of damp wood and something ancient. Carvings covered the walls, symbols, dates, and scratched words, most of them illegible. But a few stood out clearly. "They took the land from us. We are still here. The debt is not paid." Suddenly, a lantern in the corner lit itself. Its light revealed a small altar made from stacked stones, dried herbs, and photographs. Old black and white portraits of a family of 6. In each photo, the figures wore grim expressions, but in the final image, their faces were gone, scratched out violently. Tommy stepped closer. "These are the ones buried outside." As he reached for the photo, the cellar began to shake. The carvings glowed red. The air vibrated with a humming, low moan. And in the corner, a figure began to form. It was a woman, translucent, tall, her dress soaked in dirt and decay. Her face was blurred, but her eyes shone like silver fire. She raised a bony hand and pointed to the wall behind the altar. Rachel rushed over and brushed the dust aside. There was a door, small, wooden, with a lock long rusted away. They opened it, and inside was a journal, bound in leather, old but intact. June opened it. The final page read, "We were promised peace, but our home was cursed when the land was stolen. We whisper not to harm, but to warn. Return what was taken. Only then will the silence last." Suddenly everything stopped. The light flickered out, and from deep in the woods came a final, distant sigh, like an exhale from the earth itself. When they emerged, the mist was gone, the sun was up, the forest was silent, and the gravestones had vanished. The forest was awake again. Birds chirped, wind rustled the trees, the unnatural chill had lifted, but for the 4 friends, nothing felt normal. They sat near the fire pit, the journal open between them. Rachel read the line again aloud. "Return what was taken. Only then will the silence last." "But what was taken?" June whispered. "I think we need to go back to the grave markers," Eli said, glancing uneasily toward the woods. "Maybe we missed something." Reluctantly, they returned to the area where the gravestones had once been. Now only 6 indentations remained in the earth, sunken bare patches of soil where grass wouldn't grow. But in the center of the largest one, Rachel noticed something glinting in the dirt. She brushed it away. A rusty iron key engraved with a name, Susanna. That was one of the names carved in the cellar, she said. Suddenly a gust of wind swept through the trees, and with it a chorus of whispers, like hundreds of voices speaking at once. But this time, the words were clearer. She waits. She remembers. She wants it back. Rachel felt a chill crawl up her spine. The altar, she said. Something was taken from the altar. They rushed back to the cellar, now strangely easier to find, the path clearer, the stairs uncovered, as if the forest wanted them to return. Inside, everything was as they left it, except now, the altar had a gap in the center where something square had once rested. A box, Eli guessed, or a book. Or both, Rachel said slowly, her eyes widening. She reached into her backpack and pulled out the small journal they'd found earlier in the house ruins, where Tommy had said he felt like something was watching. She hadn't opened it until now. Inside were dozens of entries written by a woman named Susanna in the 1870s, describing the farm, the land, the birth of her children, and the slow, creeping madness that overtook them when strangers bought the land from her husband after his mysterious death. The last entry read, "They said it would be ours forever, but they lied. They moved the stones, broke the seals. Now we wander in silence. I will not sleep until I hold this book again." Without hesitation, Rachel placed the journal on the altar. The room breathed. A rush of cold wind surged upward from beneath the floor. The carvings on the walls glowed softly, then faded. A golden warmth replaced the icy tension. The lantern lit itself one final time, then extinguished for good. And a woman's voice, barely more than a whisper, drifted through the air. "Thank you." The four stood in silence, and then from outside the sound of birdsong returned. Not eerie, not strange, just normal, peaceful. As they emerged from the cellar, they turned back. The foundation was gone. Nothing remained but trees. 1 week later, back in Brookvale, Rachel returned to her room and found something on her nightstand. A small bouquet of wildflowers, fresh, untouched, and tied with a piece of twine. No note, just a whisper in the room as she stared at them. "The debt is paid."